baby boomers,
I used to be with it.
millennials,
Okay, Boomer.
Generation X,
What's going on?
and Gen Z. What do they have in common? Not a lot, it turns out. But one thing they can agree on is that this is the political podcast they want to listen to. Welcome to Not My Generation, the political podcast that looks at political events, news, and happenings across the world and at home through a generational lens. Your hosts are Dr. Emily Stacy and Professor James Davenport, two political scientists from Rose State College. But the views expressed on this program are solely the views of the host and their guests and do not reflect the views of Rose State College, its administration, faculty, or students. Coming up on today's program.
I would say artificial intelligence is the absolute heart of our process because what it allows us to do is process unstructured data, millions of comments, posts, discussions, X posts, Facebook posts, Reddit posts, Instagram comments, RSS feeds, all of that. And so without artificial intelligence, that kind of analysis would take weeks and an army of analysts. And with it, we can act immediately. Each platform has its own influence. For example, Instagram comments trends more among younger voters. X is very useful for shaping political media narratives. Our artificial intelligence processes this through neural language processing.
And now, here are James and Emily. Good morning, Dr. Sharp.
Well, good morning. How are you,
Professor
Davenport?
I am doing all right. For our listeners, Dr. Stacy is out on assignment. I'll just put it that way. She's out today. So Dr. Sharp has graciously again joined us to fill in. And we have, I think, is going to be a very, very interesting conversation lined up today. Our guest today is Christopher Wilson, who is a nationally recognized leader in data analytics, artificial intelligence, and Republican political strategy. As the CEO of Eyes Over US, Wilson leads efforts to transform public opinion research through cutting-edge AI technology. The mission Chris has given his team at Eyes Over is to empower political campaigns, public affairs organizations, and businesses with real-time insights into sentiment shifts, voter behavior, emerging trends, enabling them to succeed in an ever-changing digital landscape. Prior to becoming the CEO of Eyes Over, Chris founded WPA Intelligence, which developed data-driven strategies for Republican campaigns across the United States. During this period, he was involved with several high-profile gubernatorial campaigns, including those of Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, Ron DeSantis in Florida, Greg Abbott in Texas, and Kevin Stitt right here in Oklahoma. He also served as the director of analytics for Senator Ted Cruz's presidential campaign and has also served as an advisor to the National Republican Senatorial Committee and the National Republican Congressional Committee. Chris has been a recognized leader in his industry, having earned the Pollster of the Year award from the American Association of Political Consultants in 2021, and he's been named the Technology Leader of the Year by Campaigns and Elections magazine in 2019. He is a thought leader on societal implications of AI and data politics and regularly contributes to outlets like the Wall Street Journal and on his Substack, which you can find him at christopherwilson.substack.com. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, you bet, James. Good to be on and good to see you again. It's been a while.
Yes, it has. Our podcast is called Not My Generation, and we kind of like to talk about the differences in generational perspectives on politics. We've got some just kind of some get-to-know-you questions that we're going to run you through real fast. But the first one we always ask, which generation are you? You a millennial, Gen X, Boomer, Gen Z? Where do you fall?
I wish I was Gen Z, but I'm Gen X. And not because
all right. Hey, no,
Z,
do not apologize for being Gen X.
Yeah. No, I love being Gen X. I think we're the next greatest generation. I would never supplant the real greatest generation. But I'm part of the generation that grew up without the internet. We were full of key kids. We had to learn to adapt quickly. And I think that gave me a unique perspective in politics because I can relate to the analog world where I gave up. I mean, I have my house. We had a dial phone in my house. But I also can fully embrace data technology and artificial intelligence because I remember the world before it existed. And to me, that's kind of a key distinguishing point between those who truly are Gen Z or others that have never known a world without the internet.
Right. Excellent.
Hey, Chris, what are you currently reading or watching or listening to?
I'm currently reading The Fourth Turning is Here by Neil Howe. It's about historical cycles and how they shape the future. And I think it's a lens that is incredibly useful for political strategy and understanding voter behavior.
Who are the authors? Strauss and Howe?
Yeah.
Strauss and Howe. That's a good generational. They're the kind of the experts on generations.
All right.
Agreed.
All right. So what's your favorite or at least most used social media platform?
It'd be X, formerly Twitter. I think it's where news, politics, and public sentiment kind of collide in real time. It's not perfect. It can be noisy. But I also think it's invaluable for spotting narratives before they hit the mainstream.
Okay.
So, Chris, how do you spend your time for fun? What's your favorite pastime or hobby?
It's really two things. It's number one, spending time with my family. I have 5 kids, 2 that are in college, 2 daughters that are almost, teenagers, 13 and 11. I guess one is technically a teenager. And then I have a 3-year-old, kind of starting the process all over again. And to me, there's nothing that really beats that. But if there is a moment of free time I have on an airplane, early in the morning, things like that, it's reading. I read about a book a week. And that's my goal every year, is to get through at least 52 books. And that's so far I've done it for the last few years in a row. And so I am, if you've ever got a good recommendation, send it my way.
Awesome. And it's also awesome. My wife and I also have 5 children. And so we have bucked the trend, right? So I'm pleased to say we're doing our part to keep the population level up.
And James, you have great kids.
We have pretty good kids. Yeah, that's right. But ours are all, I do not envy you. I know that kind of that 3-4-year-old age can be a really fun time, but I don't envy you having one that young. I'm just going to say.
He's awesome. I couldn't imagine life without him today.
All right. So what is one significant event that has occurred during your lifetime that has had an impact on your personal political views or your professional career? Either one.
Yeah, it would be the 2010 race for Mike Lee. Mike Lee was this little-known attorney in Salt Lake City who called me out of the blue because he'd read an article I had written for Campaigns and Elections magazine, of all things. It was about kind of the precursor of data and as it was growing. And that was just kind of the time whenever the apex of Moore's Law had just hit, where we could afford to do analytics in down ballot races. And Lee was running against an incumbent United States senator. And you got to remember, no one had a challenger had not beat an incumbent senator in about 30 years in Republican campaigns. And we built a predictive model in this to turn out voters to a convention, and then ultimately it went to a runoff. And it was really the first cycle on the Republican side. Democrats led it in 2008, and great books, kind of a seminal text in the utilization of data analytics in political campaigns by a guy named Sasha Eisenberg called The Victory Lab. But that really kind of evolved into Republicans. And I read that I dog-eared the whole thing. And then we began the implementation of it. And it's really the first cycle where digital data, micro-targeting, and behavioral analytics transformed a race that allowed us to kind of shock the world. And I think it made me realize that the old models of public opinion research were broken. And it set me on a path to create better tools like data analytics and ultimately to my current role at Eyes Over.
Well, let's jump into talking about what you are doing at Eyes Over and the work that's going on there. Let's begin with how you entered the world of politics. You talked about working with Mike Lee, but you've been doing this kind of work for quite a while now. I don't want to age you too much, but you've been doing this work for quite a while. So how did you get involved in this this combination of politics, public opinion, political data analytics? How did all that emerge?
It's I'm going to date myself because I'm not ashamed of my age. And I was a student at Georgetown in 1989 in a program called, it was predictive econometrics, basically. It was called the Institute on Comparative Political and Economic Systems. And I was focusing on specific areas. I'd gone to Georgetown the year before and begun a program, found out about this one and jumped into it. And then I took a semester off and went and worked for the Virginia governor's race. We lost. In fact, I lost several Virginia governor's races up until Glenn Youngkin in 2021. So that was a kind of a weight off my shoulders on something that had gotten away from me multiple times. But it was over time, I became really frustrated with how slow and outdated methods were. And so I kept trying to push the envelope. I ended up joining a couple of national survey firms that are still around, and one based here in Oklahoma and one based in DC. I'd served as executive director of the Republican Party in Texas. And that's when a guy named Haley Barbour was national chairman, and got a grant from him to build an in-house survey research system, and built that out, did the programming by hand, built the Katie systems by hand, or programmed them myself. And all these things kind of prepared me for where we are. And I'd say now the industry relied on snapshots of where the political environment was changing hour by hour. And that frustration drove me toward building data-driven real-time solutions. And first with predictive analytics, and now with Eyes Over. So I would really point back to my beginnings as a student, taking a semester off and working on that governor's race in 1989, comes full circle with what I'm doing today, and kind of bringing the culmination of where you can get the best data to make decisions, which is clearly, and I think inarguably, online, and turn that into strategies for a political campaign that allows you to stay ahead of your opponents. And that's always been my motivation in life, has been beating Democrats, liberals, moderates, anybody who shares a different ideology than I am. I want to go head to head with them in a political campaign and come out on top.
You got a clear goal and a clear mission statement, so to speak, huh?
Right.
So, Chris, you mentioned real time. When I think about the kind of work that you do, I think about the traditional public opinion firms, Gallup and Pew and some of the other major political consulting firms. What sets your firm apart from those?
That's a great question. I would say Gallup and Pew and a lot of the sort of legacy polling firms in politics do great work, but they operate on survey cycles. And this is the one thing I saw, and I know we'll talk about this in a little bit, and what caused me to make the decision to make the move over to Eyes Over is traditional survey research is days and sometimes even weeks between measurement and results. And Eyes Over is live. We pull in millions of public opinion signals every day, every hour, even every minute, and turn them into actionable strategies within hours. So for a political strategist, that's the difference between reacting after the fact and shaping the narrative in real time. And I will tell you, the ability to know a problem has arisen and deal with it in real time is the difference between the public knowing the problem even exists. And you can take a recent example in Oklahoma that we're all aware of, where I'll just name names here, where the state superintendent of education was accused of having what's the right? Can I say porn on a podcast? He was accused of having porn playing on his TV in his office in a meeting. And ultimately turned out that wasn't the case. It was, I guess, a Jackie Chan movie that just happened to be operating on a regular channel. But had he known that the narrative that was emerging when it did, he could have dealt with that in a way that would have removed the silly things like blaming the governor or blaming the people who were in the room. And it could have actually dug in and probably gotten him to the real solution that I think ultimately Speaker of the House Kyle Hilbert was able to get to the bottom of. And I think that's the problem here, is that when you have those kind of potential scandals or problems that exist, crises, I should say, you begin reacting to and jumping at shadows rather than dealing with the real problem that is driving opinion. And that's, I think, a perfect example of where Eyes Over could have changed the game for someone.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys are really emphasizing in your work kind of the speed, the rapidity of being able to get the information, and then the adaptability to that information, right?
That's right.
So can you talk a little bit more about how that really changes the game for people like yourself, political strategists, as well as for your clients, and maybe talk about how that changes things from moving from those more traditional polling processes?
Yeah, James, as you know, I mean, in politics, the window to act is incredibly short. If you spot a narrative shift on Monday and then test responses on Tuesday and launch your counter message on Wednesday, you can define the story before your opponent does. And that's impossible with traditional polling that takes days, if not over a week, to deliver results. And it is, I'll give you another example specific to the state of Oklahoma. There was as you mentioned, I do work for Governor Stitt, and there was a TV station that this was a true case of fake news that called up and said, "We've learned through open records requests that the governor's taken a helicopter from his house in Edmond to to the governor's mansion every day. Well, it just wasn't true. I mean, it was flat out false. So I'll give somebody credit here. Donnell Harder was able to immediately show that not only was it untrue, that he'd only been in a helicopter like at one point, and it was to go survey damage to, I think from some floods or some fires. I can't remember what it was now. Maybe it was tornadoes, being Oklahoma. And she was able to immediately jump on top of that, send it to the TV station. It was about to run this story that was completely 100% false. They were still going to go forward with it. Oh, well, your opponent, Joy Hoffmeister, said it's true, so it must be true. And then we were able to, again, take it up to the next notch in terms of saying if you do say this, it is untrue, which is not allowed. You can report things that you may believe to be true, but now you know it's not true. And so the ability to react immediately like that, because Donnell had that information, she was able to prevent something negative from happening with the governor on the information that was absolutely untrue being put out by the opponent's campaign. Well, a lot of times you don't have that sort of ability to react because it's happening on social media. That is where the speed of real time, the adaptability changes the game. And that's where Eyes Over allows you to sort of politically time the market, if you will.
One of my favorite topics is AI. I go way back. There's like a chapter in my dissertation from 1998, to date me a little bit, that talks about AI and all that stuff. So I'd like you to discuss your incorporation of AI into your processes. How do you use it as a tool? How to use it to give your firm an advantage over others who have yet to incorporate those processes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the AAPC recently did a survey of political consultants and people in the political industry. And it was stunning to me how few people are actually using AI right now. I would say artificial intelligence is the absolute heart of our process, because what it allows us to do is process unstructured data, millions of comments, posts, discussions. Think X posts, Facebook posts, Reddit posts, Instagram comments, RSS feeds, all of that. I can tell you in Texas, when I was doing Ted Cruz's reelect last year, a guy named Brad Parscale, who ultimately hired me for this role or offered me this role, who was running Eyes Over, was sending me the processed data of 107,000 discussion points per day, unstructured data per day, that was being transferred into a trend line that showed the election results, the predicted election results between Colin Allred and Ted Cruz. And those results ended up being significantly more accurate than what we had did from a polling perspective. And so without artificial intelligence, that kind of analysis would take weeks and an army of analysts. And with it, we can act immediately. I'll give you another example. There was a situation that happened with the president. And it was back in January where we saw a significant drop between one day and the next. We were able to take, and you can imagine how many people post online about President Trump in a day. It's millions. And so we were able to take, hypothetically, Tuesday's comments and Wednesday's comments, throw them all into artificial intelligence, say, okay, tell us what caused this change. And it was able to tell us specifically what 80% of those comments were directly attributable to a specific thing. And then the other 20% were either indirectly attributable or attributable to something else. And that took maybe 5 minutes to process. Can you imagine the amount of time it would take to go through millions of unstructured data points that were comments about any elected official, but certainly the president of the United States and Donald Trump, who's probably the most famous one we've ever had. And from that standpoint, our ability to give recommendations within minutes rather than days or weeks, which would have been the case with traditional legacy survey research.
Number one, it's just amazing that you can collect and process all of that data as quickly as you can now with these tools. Walk us through, once you've collected this data, what's the steps you go through into analyzing it? And then how does that guide you in shaping the insights you're going to offer to your clients?
That's going to be very different on a case-by-case basis. I'll talk about where we get the data, and I've kind of addressed this, but let me be more specific. So we ingest public data from platforms like X and Facebook, where we have an API, and we can receive the data directly from them. We can get Instagram comments, YouTube comments, news sites, blogs, even niche forums, Reddit, things like that. So I was just doing a process the other day in South Carolina where there's Reddit Republican groups for Columbia and Reddit Republican groups for, you name it, just like half the big cities there. and even the congressional districts. And each platform has its own influence. For example, Instagram comments trends more among younger voters. X is very useful for shaping political media narratives. And our artificial intelligence processes this through neural language processing and context modeling to surface the issues that matter. And James, that's really the key distinction here, because there are other platforms that you can use to monitor sentiment online. There's Meltwater, there's Brandwatch, and those are great. But what makes us different, and I would argue better, and certainly more applicable for a political campaign, is EyeSover was initially developed by a professor of computer science and sociology. And he initially utilized machine learning to take sentiment data and apply it to election data to develop trends. So I can look at a race, and I should say this is what when I was doing Ted Cruz's polling in 2024, and Brad Parscale was sending me the data every single day that showed where the race was between Cruz and Allred. That was processing about, on average, 107,000 data points a day. It initially, like I said, it utilized machine learning for the purposes of taking those data and turning them into a trend analysis. These people are for Allred, these people are for Cruz. What they did in 2023, or I think it was 22 anyway, is they implemented their own large language model. They fed it in all of their past data that used that sentiment analysis for the purposes of developing trends. And then the large language model learned from that. So it is now developed through artificial intelligence. And so I could look at, let's say hypothetically, the New York City mayor's race. And I can tell you where it was last night as of midnight. I can tell you where it is as of today as of 10:30. And what's really, when I saw this in real time for Cruz, is we tracked through the Sunday before the election and only had Senator Cruz up 3 points. Brad Parscale sends me the numbers on Tuesday morning that shows the senator up 8 points. And he called me later that afternoon, right as he got to Mar-a-Lago, because he got invited to the party and I didn't. And he said, hey, you guys are going to win by 8.5. And we won by 8.5. So, and that was because he was able, the artificial intelligence was adjusting throughout the day based on people posting, just voted and things like that. And what's even cooler about that, James, is the AI can make allowances if in Texas in the past, more Democrats say did an I voted post than Republicans do. So it learns from that over time. And that really gives us a competitive advantage because our large language model is trained on this data going back to 2014 when the company was first begun. And it had all that machine learning data built into it. And now it's moved over AI. So it'd be really difficult for anybody to even catch up to where we are because we have so much of it. Now, I know you just asked me what time it was, and I told you how to build a clock. But to me, the artificial intelligence processing here and how we deliver it to our clients is really the unique system that made me want to leave what I had built for 20 years and come run this company.
To me, that sounds like that's what the fascinating piece of this is the way you're incorporating this social media data. And I want to come back to that here in a second because there have always been some questions about social media engagement and the representativeness of the people who are on social media. So I want to find out how you deal with some of those issues. But just the ability to grab that, analyze it, and not in exclusion of the other data, like the polling data that you have, but in incorporating it into that just seems like a very fascinating process and one that would reveal, more insights in what you're going to get just doing that traditional type of work itself.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's important in terms of how you look at the users too, from a standpoint of looking at the broader ecosystem, not just who's posting, who's engaging, who's sharing, who's adopting ideas. And we weight our insights to avoid over-indexing on loud voices. So the goal is to understand the conversation that will spill into mainstream awareness, not just the echo chambers. It's also one of the unique aspects of the platform that I didn't even anticipate when I joined is the identification of micro-influencers. There may be somebody in Oklahoma who has 100 or 2,000 followers, but when he or she posts, there's little engagement. You're more likely to see somebody with 5, 7, 10,000 followers that has immense engagement within a specific community. It could be a city, it could be an ideological aspect, it could be based on a specific issue. And those are the things that I've found to be the most important part of not just the utilization of the platform for understanding where a campaign stands, but also what language matters, and then which micro-influencers, those people who used to be like the county chairman or things like that. But those people, the county chairman, of a political party has become less significant than the county chairman of X or Facebook or the county chairman of a campaign. And that's where you've really seen, I think, the old way of politics be replaced by the new way of politics.
Yeah, and that touches on a couple of questions I wanted to ask. I'm just going to kind of combine them here, right? One of the criticisms of social media that I've seen kind of in my realm, in political science and some other areas, is that, well, the people who are most highly engaged politically on social media are different than, say, the average voter. They're not the same type of people. And then there's also the problem, as you mentioned, like echo chambers, bots that seem to be, or even coordinated campaigns that are trying to skew sentiment. So how do you navigate all of that? How do you kind of weed out, what's true versus what's not? And are there certain platforms that have more weight than others? You talked about how some platforms give you different information. So like Instagram being something more connected to younger voters and such. So are there platforms that seem to weight more in the way you evaluate this than others?
That is an evolving question. And I'll tell you, for instance, in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, we found that Blue Sky was very significant in terms of measuring the overall campaign. Now, at that point, Blue Sky had about 20 million active users. As is often the case with left-wing groupings, they've now shamed so many people out of the system that it's down to about 500,000. That's true. So it is, to me, that's kind of like, you've got to watch for it. You've got to stay on top of it. Today's answer will be very different than maybe tomorrow's answer or next week's answer. And from a standpoint of the bots, that's a very, very important aspect of it. And we have a bot detection algorithm and network analysis tools that identify coordinated activity. So once flagged, that data is either removed or weighted appropriately so it does not distort the sentiment. So the idea here is to focus on authentic, organic opinion, even when it is partisan or heated. And I'll tell you another example from my cruise experience is just out of curiosity. I saw a post on X back during the campaign in which a woman had posted, "Biden's doing a great job on the border." So that's sarcasm, right? If you look at her background, you would know that she did not mean it. She was being sarcastic. I actually took a screenshot of it and sent it to Parscale and said, "Do me a favor, look and see where she is allocated." And he sent me back inside the system and showed that she was allocated as both a Cruz and a Trump voter. So the ability to build out sort of probability models, a probability score specific to someone based on their overall track record is important. If you looked at my track record and I said, I'm trying to think of a well-known Democrat in Oklahoma, I can't think of one, but if there was one, and I said, "Hey, this person's doing a great job," and then you look at my platform and everything I've said, and it's very unlikely that I meant that in a serious manner, then there would be a probability score attached to that to make sure it was allocated appropriately.
Very interesting. That's it's just fascinating that you can do that in as quickly as you can, right? I mean, before the technology that we have today, you might not even be able to do that. And if you could, it could take you a week or two to figure that kind of thing out, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of the key here. Now, I've been building out probability models specific to voters on multiple issues, going, like I said, back to the 2010 Ted Cruz race. It's why, James, you may remember in the 2022 election, whenever there was a lot of polling that showed Joy Hoffmeister winning or up close, I never had the race close. I never had it within, it may have been within single digits, like high single digits, 8 or 9 for a little while, but we had it as double digits whenever all these other polling firms in Oklahoma that I'd never even heard of were putting out numbers showing Joy Hoffmeister up. And I was sort of perplexed by it because I'm looking at our overall probability as a specific voter. And if I've got James Davenport scored as 80% likelihood to vote for the Republican, and I see them being allocated to the Democrat, then I know there's something wrong with my polling. And to me, that's the one thing that most firms have not caught up with is they just still are doing, whenever you mentioned I was named Pollster of the Year after the Glenn Youngkin race. And whenever I accepted that award, my talk centered on the fact that we had to find what was next in polling. Polling began with lists. You remember the Reader's Digest list. It's the famous Dewey beats Truman line. And then from there, it went to random digit dialing. And then from there, it went to registration-based sampling. And from there, it went to proportional probability selection. And then it went to proportional probability selection utilizing analytics. And LiveBid is a part of every one of those evolutions outside of the first one from the list. And my point is that we have gotten away from the time in which an average statistically significant sample of voters is going to answer an unknown call on their phone and speak to someone they don't know for 20 minutes. The other day I was in the doctor's office and I had to fill out a form that said who to call in terms of an emergency, in case of emergency. And I put 911 because no one in my family is going to answer an unknown call from a hospital they never heard of or a doctor's office they never heard of. So there's no point in calling any but my wife. They're not going to take your call. And it's just really, that's the way that the voting public has become. And so anytime you see somebody say, oh, I did a 300 sample online or on the phone or whatever of people, think about anybody you know who will answer an unknown call. And let's face it, they are deeply weird people. I am one of them. I actually answer them because I want to find out if it's a political call. So I am a deeply weird person that will talk to a pollster on the phone. But if you want to do a sampling and illustrate a race or show where a race is based on a conversation with those people, it is fundamentally flawed from the outset. And that was the case of every single poll that was released in 2022, and why I kept putting polls out that were initially ignored, showing Kevin Stitt up by double digits. Well, then 10 days before the election, we put out a poll out saying this was where the election is going to be. And some of that was because of our utilization of artificial intelligence. It's also because of predictive analytics. So all those things played together. And that, to me, is the importance of the evolution of this industry.
So I noticed on your website that you are forecasting how policies might play out. And I teach policy analysis, and I would love to take something back to our students. How do you build those models? What kind of accuracy have you seen in real world political outcomes in terms of policy?
Well, to that, I'm going to defer a little bit and point out that I've only been in the role since January 1, so I have not seen a lot of it yet. But we did do a lot of work around the Big Beautiful Bill and some of the other reconciliation aspects that have come up. We do a lot of work on sentiment toward Israel and sentiment toward other policies that are specific to the White House. And it's from a standpoint of making recommendations. To me, I actually wrote a Substack called, just entitled, Focus Group are dead because they died of irrelevance. And I say this all the time, and I'm probably making a lot of focus group moderators and facilities angry. But anyone who's still spending money on focus groups, which is, for anyone who's not familiar, a focus group is where you pay 10, 12 people to come in and talk to a moderator for a couple hours about an issue. And they're just absolutely the worst way to try and learn what the public feels about a specific issue. And so our ability to ingest millions of data points specific to a conversation, specific to an issue, and then provide advice on that, I think is pretty significant. And so from that, if there's ever an issue that we are hired to get involved in, and a great example of this was property taxes in Texas, where we were able to say, this is where the public is on it. Here's the feelings in Texas. Here's the feelings in Oklahoma. Oklahoma, actually, Florida was the other one we were looking at over time, and being able to make recommendations. Here's how people respond to this language. Here's how people are on this policy. And to me, that's the value of what we're able to do, is monitoring where the public is in real time to be able to provide recommendations from a qualitative basis, even though it is quantitative in its approach in terms of data, back to our clients.
Is there one example that you're like, this is the ideal example when I want to talk to people? This is an example of how I've taken these predictive tools and I've been able to provide some advice or recommendations to an official, and man, we were spot on and it hit just like we thought it would. Is there an episode that you can think about that just kind of stands out to you that you can share with us?
I think I'd go back to the Oklahoma governor's race in 22. We were tracking sentiment for Governor Stitt, and our predictive models did flag a late-breaking narrative about education funding and school choice that wasn't showing up yet in polling, but started to gain traction online. And our data showed it had the potential to dominate the closing weeks of the race, and we did that. I'll tell you another example that I was not involved in, but where Eyes Over was, and this is, I'll give credit to Brad Parscale on this one, is recognizing the rise of the issue of housing in late 24. And it wasn't everywhere. Like it didn't impact the race at all in Pennsylvania, but they really saw it becoming a major defining issue in Georgia. So it allowed the Trump campaign and really some of the super PACs around him to pivot and start talking about housing, the increased cost of housing. And Harris really never addressed it. So I think those are a couple of examples where I've seen our recommendations have a very quick impact on decisions made in a race. I'll give you one other example. This is one that, sorry, you asked me a question like that and I had to think it through. 2024, again, I'm doing the tracking for Senator Cruz, not involved in Eyes Over. I'm just getting these reports sent to me every morning from Brad Parscale. And you remember the Beyonce rally in Houston, where she came, they did the event, she doesn't sing, they paid her $250,000. I guess she just came out and said, vote Harris and left. And but the next day, Parscale calls me. He goes, hey, you guys have a problem. You're down. You need to get the senator to the border and change the narrative. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. We're not down. I'm just got out of the field. We're up. He goes, yeah, whatever. I'm not trying to argue with you. Just change the narrative. So I called the chief of staff and, the senators in Houston. It's pretty easy to get the border from Houston. So we did. We went down. And the one thing you're always guaranteed if you go to the border is you'll get a lot of press around it. He went and did a tour. And so from that, about 2 days later, Parscale sends me the numbers every morning. And he calls me and says, hey, you're back up. You fixed it. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. We were never down. And then the next day in our polling, we're down. And then 3 days later, we go back up. So I actually said to my analysts on the race, do me a favor, take our polling numbers and the Eyes Over numbers, and let's overlay them and see what happened. And it was almost like you were looking into a mirror, in that Eyes Over was leading almost exactly where the polling was by about a 2 to 3 day lead. And so it really crystallized in my mind at that point that this has become legacy polling is a trailing indicator to what we get from the sentiment analysis of Eyes Over. And again, that was kind of that in the accuracy at the end of the race are the things that sort of made my mind believe that this is the future of public opinion.
Your work, have you thought about the ethical implications of what you do? I'm thinking a little bit about how the tools allow you and your clients to better understand public sentiment. But what about manipulating it?
Sure.
Or shaping opinion?
Well, there's definitely a line, no question about it. And I think understanding sentiment is about listening, and shaping is about persuading. The danger is when shaping becomes manipulation and presenting false or misleading information. And at Eyes Over, we focus on clarity and not distortion. I think our role is to help clients engage authentically with the concerns and priorities that voters already have, certainly not to invent them. And I think a perfect example that's kind of come to light recently of whenever it becomes manipulation is the Steele dossier in 2016. And I think you're going to see people prosecuted over that because it really crossed the line in terms of trying to change a presidential election and then ultimately change the ability of a new president to govern. And so as more information comes out on that, I think that is a great example of where it wasn't AI, it was just communication was used to manipulate rather than and present false and misleading information. And to me, those are the kind of things that people in our industry have a moral responsibility to avoid and to call out if we see it. And I can tell you that is problematic. And it's one where I think we as political practitioners have to come together and really put ethics and the right of the public to not be lied to above any other goals and achievements that we may try and move on.
We love communication that goes both ways, not just you listening to us pontificate. We would love to hear from our audience. If you have comments, suggestions, or would like to contact us about possibly being a guest on the show, please email notmygeneration@rader.rose.edu.
Can you give us any insight about what's going on with the Epstein case in terms of the Trump White House?
No, I'm not involved in things at that level. So it's not that I don't really have the ability to talk about anything other than to what's going on online and how sentiment is and things like that around it.
So what are some trends, either political trends or technology related trends that are relevant to our discussion today that we might want to be watching for over the next year or two?
Well, I mean, it's tried to say it, but I think there's no question that the growth of AI, I think the hyper acceleration of narrative cycles, sorry, I've got polling on the brain, so samples. Political narratives rise and fall in hours, not days and weeks, and a single viral clip or post can trigger a measurable opinion shift within 12 to 24 hours. I think that makes polling almost obsolete for monitoring that, and it makes real-time monitoring essential. I think local issues going national overnight. You can think of school board controversies, utility rate hikes, small town policy changes. You know, after I moved to Atlanta for the DeSantis presidential effort, and I moved back to Eufaula because we have a lake house there, and it blew up overnight that they were trying to put windmills around Lake Eufaula. And I think small town policy changes become national talking points in under 48 hours. Look what happened with Chicago with the fight recently and how quickly that became a national story. And I think campaigns that start these stories early can define the narrative before opponents or national media jump in. Emotion is driving engagement. I think positive sentiment rarely drives virality. Outrage, fear, and humor kind of dominate those patterns. This means campaigns have to understand emotional resonance in addition to basic approved, disapproved metrics, the kind of things that we've measured for years, pollsters. The fragmentation of media influence will continue. You know, it's like how many people still watch local news or still read the local newspaper? There's a number of them, but the fracturing of this is driven completely. And I think no single platform drives sentiment anymore. Influence is split across X for elite political chatter, TikTok and Instagram for younger audiences, YouTube for long form persuasion. And then again, there's those niche communities that I mentioned, like Reddit for deep policy debate. And then to your question of trends, I think AI is just a force multiplier for analysis. Neural and natural language processing now handles billions of words of unstructured conversation daily, far beyond what any human analyst team could process. And context modeling allows the system to know why people feel the way they do, not just what they say. I can tell you our large language model, I am constantly feeding any academic studies I can find in the areas of political communication. And there's a lot of that coming out of Europe that are specific to X that I really am eating up. And then, predictive analytics has moved from a nice to have. In 2010, when we did it for Mike Lee, it was fortunately because nobody else was helping him, I was able to talk him into it. But for a long time, I had to really go in and argue with people why analytics was so important. And I think political decision makers are now asking, where will sentiment be in 2 weeks instead of what's sentiment now? And the advantage is adjusting early and before a traditional pollster can even get in the field. Other ones are bot and manipulation detection. You guys asked about that. It's becoming standard. I think as coordinated campaigns, influence campaigns increase, advanced bot detection and network mapping tools are absolutely crucial for separating authentic opinion from synthetic noise, if you will. And then the integration of sentiment with micro-targeting. This is kind of the area that I'm spending most of my time, my free time, I should say, whenever I'm not with my family, as I mentioned earlier, reading about and trying to work on. So real-time sentiment data now being linked directly to voter files and ad targeting platforms. Now, that is against the terms and services, a lot of the platforms like X and those, so you've got to do it in different ways. And it requires a lot of creativity and a lot of very advanced math and AI utilization and machine learning. But this means a campaign can pivot messaging in the morning and have a revised targeted ad set live that afternoon that's targeting people, through OTT, digital, texting, whatever the case may be. And then the last trend, it's kind of funny. I've got two seniors in college this year. One of them is a super senior. And when they both entered college back, 2021 and 2022, I encouraged them both to go into data science. And at that point, we had probably 20 or more data scientists working for me. And it was the highest paying job out of college for like 2 or 3 years. You know what, guys? Now we don't hire data scientists anymore. We have, I think, 3 on our staff instead of the 20 we used to have. And we actually do more data work. because AI has absolutely replaced the need for a data scientist. And think about that from a standpoint of where AI has kind of gone in and acted, as I said earlier, as a force multiplier on analysis, but also the ability for us to create very quick models, predictive models for people that might have taken 24, 48 hours before, we can do in 24 or 48 minutes. And that's just remarkable from a standpoint of, I mentioned earlier, Moore's Law and the growth and computing power, and then what we can do with AI plugged into it.
Wow. We're running up against time, but I have a question, just a point of curiosity. I should have asked this earlier. Is there a favorite AI platform other than the one you use, obviously, in your work that's kind of your go-to if you've got a question you want a quick answer or want to explore something more deeply? Is there a favorite AI platform that you've got?
You know, James, I've really found that they all have different skills. If I want one to look at sentiment online, Grok's the best because it's plugged into X. I mean, if you post an X post into ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude or something like that, it can't do it. You've got to copy and paste it, whereas Grok will go and look at it. I think if I wanted to write a marketing plan, it'd probably be ChatGPT. If I wanted to write a nice letter to somebody, it'd probably be Perplexity. And then I think from a business plan, not a marketing plan, it would be Claude. So I've really spent a lot of time, and I spend a lot of time with all of them, and I feel like I've got a pretty good idea of where things are. But, ChatGPT released an update last night. So it's not fair for me to give one definitive answer because they are all in kind of a arms race to stay in front of them. And I think the key thing is whenever you go in and build and set up systems, projects, if you will, depending on which platform you're using, then you can really find one that works for you, so you don't have to go spend money on all of them. And that's kind of what I've tried to do.
Yeah, I've talked to several academics or listened to them discussing their use of AI, and a lot of them say the same thing. They have found that different platforms are more useful for different types of projects that they're working on or what their needs are at that moment. And so rather than just relying on one, they kind of have two or three that they use regularly.
Yeah, that's smart. I think it's the best way to do it, and keep trying them out and testing them.
Our guest today has been Christopher Wilson, CEO of Eyes Over. And you can follow his thoughts on AI, politics, and emerging trends at his Substack at christopherwilson.substack.com. Chris, thanks for joining us today. This has been fascinating.
Thank you, Chris.
Good to talk to both of you. Thank you.
Hey everyone, this is Deborah, the resident Gen Z member of the Not My Generation podcast family. Not My Generation is produced in the Possibilities Inc. studio. This episode was produced by Lauren Peaches Keller. It was edited by Santiago Ramones. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Send a voice memo to notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu and you could hear your voice on an upcoming episode. If you liked today's episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and sharing the podcast with others. You can check out previous episodes on any podcast app and on our podcast website at notmygeneration.captivate.fm, where we also provide our show notes. And remember, you can follow Not My Generation on X, formerly known as Twitter, at NMG Podcast, and on Facebook at Not My Generation Podcast. We look forward to interacting with you soon.